Hey guys, and welcome to this video on the cell salts, or sometimes they're called tissue salts. I wanted to make this video because I've been talking more about my use of the cell salts over on Instagram, and I've gotten a lot of questions about them, and I really feel like it's finally time for me to start talking about this. Honestly, this has been something that I've been super wary of doing. I'm not exactly sure why. It's been on my mind for the last couple of years, but I just felt like I was dealing with some internal fears and anxieties about bringing something this sort of scientific and health-based into my platform. If you're familiar with my channel, I am an astrologer and a tarot reader, and I read for creative people, and I am always looking for ways to support the creatives among us. And so covering something that's very chemical, it's like based in chemistry, it's very complicated, it's a very complex subject. It's also something that's very outside of the mainstream. I haven't ever seen any other astrologers, save for just one person, talk about this, and that was years ago. So I don't really see anybody talking about this in the mystical space or the astrology space, and the connections are really, really profound. So I wanted to come on here and make this video. It's essentially going to be like a class, a full-blown class, so it may be quite a long time, so definitely buckle in if you want to get a cup of tea or a snack. I don't know how long this is going to go, but it's going to be pretty long, I'm pretty sure. So we're going to go through all of the cell salts and their zodiacal correlations. I'm going to be sharing essentials, tidbits essentially, of what they're good for and what each salt is used for traditionally. And I'm also going to share some of my personal experiences with them. And if you've been following my channel for a while, or if you follow me on Instagram, you know that right now I am preparing to run the Moon Maps astrology course. It's a personal astronomy course and astrology course, really looking at the position of the moon in your natal chart and how it returns to that place every month. And I have developed for myself over the past several years ways that I work with my lunar return, specifically involving the cell salts and involving many other different predictive and therapeutic practices, and also magic and rituals. So that course is again very personal, and it's going to go even deeper into the cell salts and how I work with them in a very unique way. Again, I've never seen anybody use them this way, but I've been using them this way for years now, and I feel like it's very reliable for me. So everything also that I'm going to share here and in the course is just my thoughts and what I've learned based on research. Some of the experiences I've had with the cell salts have been different and genuinely have not matched up with the recommendations that I've seen given by homeopaths who are not astrologers. And in various different ways, I've seen the cell salts work in unusual ways. The class is donation based. The recommended exchange is $199, and that is an incredible value. However, I wanted to make sure that anybody who is experiencing a hardship economically at the moment can feel that they can be included in the course. We'll put the link to the course curriculum and all of that. So if you really want to learn about astrology from a predictive, a therapeutic perspective, as well as a physical health perspective, definitely check out that option below if these topics are important or intriguing for you right now, and let's get into the information. So the 12 cell salts were discovered in the 1800s by a physician and chemist by the name of Wilhelm Schussler. And he is an amazing inspiration to me. So much of what he discovered and his thought process and the way that he methodically and empirically worked through the topics that he was studying really inspires me just as an individual mind. He's such an amazing person, and I really encourage you guys to read more about him. But essentially, he made this discovery that there are essentially 12 inorganic mineral compounds that are present in the human body and that actually make up the tissues of the human body. And the way that he discovered this was actually by studying mineral ash, which is the cremated remains of human beings. And he studied the mineral ash and found these 12 inorganic mineral compounds. And then what he did, because he was a physician as well as a chemist, is he studied the health histories, the recorded health histories of the people whose remains he was studying. And he actually found that there were specific correlations between the salts that were missing or in low quantities in the remains to specific health issues that the people that had passed on had experienced during their lifetime. So he kind of reverse engineered the cell salts and what they are used for in the body. And it's very well known that there are different concentrations of mineral compounds in different parts of the body. On Instagram, I did mention Kayleigh, which to me is one of the most amazing examples of this. Kayleigh is potassium phosphate, and it's the ARIES salt, and it's most abundantly found in the gray matter of the brain. So here we get the ARIES connection, obviously with, the brain being in the head. And we also know from chemistry that potassium phosphate, when sprinkled on the surface of water, will actually create these violet kind of purpley explosions. So when it's mixed with water, and so our brain is, obviously has a lot of water in it. It has a lot of potassium phosphate in it. And it kind of almost gives you this very empirical kind of concept of, our neurons like firing off inside of our brain. And that is just one of the really amazing things to me about this research, that it just sort of comes to life. So one of the things that Schussler found was that you could diagnose deficiencies of the 12 cell salts by the face, and he saw different things. So for example, with the Pisces salt ferrum phos, one of the physical facial signs of a deficiency in ferrum phosphate is dark circles under the eyes. And I don't know about you, but that is the Pisces salt, and I have seen people with a lot of Pisces in their chart who do have those kind of darker circles under their eyes. So there are some interesting, and all of these are empirical observations. This is old research. So there's definitely a lot more work that can be done in this field. However, I haven't seen that many new studies being done on it. So I'm really just sharing what I find interesting, and I encourage all of you to do your own research as well to see what resonates with you about this and how you feel about this topic. But for me personally, I'm quite convinced that there's something special here. Also because I've been using the salts since the beginning of 2016, and I have actually seen amazing results from them in my own life, and I'm going to share more about that in this video and also more in depth in the Moon Maps course. So let's talk about Aries and the Aries salt, which I just mentioned, Kayleigh. Kayleigh is a really great mineral for anyone who is experiencing headaches at the top of the head. It's really good for also mood swings or feelings of lethargy or feeling kind of down, feeling like a difficulty in sort of having clear thoughts as well. So sluggishness, as well as sluggishness of the mind or the thinking process. One of the things that I really noticed about myself after I started taking the Kayleigh was a couple of things. So again, I can't promise that anybody else would have these exact experiences, and these are only my own experiences. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a homeopathic practitioner. I am just an enthusiast and a recreational, I guess, researcher of these salts, and I have been for years now. So I'm just sharing my thoughts. Don't take this as gospel and don't expect this to be your experience, but I encourage you to look into it if it's something that interests you, because as well, these remedies are quite cheap. I buy mine from Highlands. I just trust their business, and I always go to their website to purchase, and they have links to other retailers where you can get verified remedies directly from them. So I'll put all that information below, but essentially I have used Highlands. They're based in the US, which is where I am, and so that's why I get them from there. But they're very inexpensive, and because it's a homeopathic remedy, or homeopathically prepared remedy, I should rather say, there's very little risk involved with taking these salts. But because they are homeopathic remedy, they're very reduced in terms of their concentration. And the ones that I use are 6x, so they've been triturated 6 times, which means that there was one out of 10 parts was the mineral, and then they repeat that shaking process, the succusion process, 6 times. So it becomes very, very small amount of mineral actually present in these. But if you're familiar with homeopathy, that's actually how it works. So it releases the medicinal vibration of the substance, and in this case these are minerals, so they're a little bit different than if they were herbs or some of the other things that homeopaths create medicines out of. The theory here is that the homeopathic preparation makes the minerals very much more accessible to the body. So because they are triturated in this way, they're more accessible to the body, and the body can absorb them directly. And you also don't need a lot of these minerals in order to have a fully functioning body. So let's get into Aries, Kayleigh. One of the things that I found really powerful about Kayleigh when I started taking it was actually that I noticed that I became a little bit less insecure, which is kind of interesting. I definitely wouldn't say that this would be kind of like the only thing that someone who deals with a lot of anxiety or insecurity could take, and then all of a sudden all of that is just gone, because there is also an emotional and mental element. For example, changing our thoughts is a really important practice, and becoming more aware of our thoughts and how our thoughts create different emotional states within us. So I definitely don't want to take away from that, because these are not panaceas, but I do feel that they are very, very helpful, and they're helpful in surprising ways. So with the Aries salts, one thing I noticed was that my hearing kind of changed. I experienced a couple of small things within the first week or so of taking Kayleigh regularly, where I felt like I was hearing smaller sounds around me in more of a conscious way. So it was kind of, I would hear like a little sound that I didn't notice before, because I think my brain was sort of deleting it. Or my hearing I got more sensitive to my ability to hear. So something along those lines. Again, I can't say for sure exactly how that worked, but that was definitely something that I noticed, which I never read anywhere that that's what Kayleigh would do. Okay, so I know I wasn't influenced by anything, any placebo or anything like that, because that wasn't what I was expecting. The things that I thought were potential would be, sometimes I do experience headaches, tension headaches, especially after a long day of readings, especially if I've been really busy, or if I had a lot of emails to answer, or if I was really getting a lot of tough reading questions that were very heavy. That's part of just what I do as a reader, even though I have so many practices that I do for self-care and so many things that I engage in that really help me. You're still, anytime that you're really giving 1,000% of yourself to your work, you're gonna see physical manifestations of that. And so that was one of the things. And so I thought, okay, this could help with those headaches that I don't get every day, but I do sometimes experience them. I can't say for certain that this is what got rid of those headaches, and I still occasionally will get them. I don't take Kayleigh every day at this point. I just take it when I want it or when I need it. So I'll show you the bottle here, Kayleigh from Highlands. And I like to put my little notes. This is the second or third round of labels that I've made on these in the years since I've been using these, because I just find that I update kind of what I've written. I'll add certain things that I've noticed that it helped me with, and I'll add certain like ways that I feel that the remedy actually works. So this is my current iteration of the labels that I make. And I wrote for Aries: nervousness, anxious fatigue, burnout, memory, gray brain matter health. Obviously, like I said before, if there's a mineral that is abundant in a particular area of the body, I think taking the homeopathic version of that mineral is very likely to be supportive of that area, and that is, you know, something that's talked about not from an astrological perspective, but just from a homeopathy perspective, which is again where I've gotten a lot of my training on this. There isn't a lot of information out there on the astrology of these salts. Really, the only person who talked about this was Dr. George Carey, and he's got a really amazing book called Relation of the Mineral Salts of the Body to the Signs of the Zodiac. And that is a really great, concise book that he wrote about the connections between the cell salts and astrology. But there's really not a lot of information about this out there. Most, again, of the information that I have gained from this has been understanding, okay, here's the zodiacal connections or connotations of these salts. And here's what homeopaths and naturopaths are saying that these salts are good for, even in modern times, not just, you know, research from the 1800s when we had very limited scientific instruments. We did have, you know, microscopes. We had so many different things that could give us deeper insight into what these molecules looked like and what they maybe did when they were submerged in different substances. But again, we were, you know, at a different place scientifically back then. So we have to remember that, like, the Carey research, the Schussler research, this is the starting point. This is the root of this, but it's not the end, hopefully. And maybe me sharing about this in the astrology community will kind of help move this along, because I think that there is something really special here. And because we're in such a, you know, crisis globally right now where our health and healing are so important, I wanted to make sure to share about this on my platform in the biggest degree possible. This just gives someone a little bit of comfort and relief, which is what these salts have definitely done for me. That's everything to me. That is seriously everything to me. So I'm just going to keep going. So essentially, that was one thing I noticed. I don't tend to get the headaches as much, and if I do get a headache, when I take the Kayleigh, I do feel that it helps the headache go down. Okay, so the rest that I want to say about the Kayleigh. So another thing that I felt was, like I mentioned before, I felt less insecure, and this was something that I particularly noticed in social situations. I felt less self-conscious is the word. I think I just had a clearer mind-body connection, whereas before I had taken these salts, I think it was at a different point in my life, obviously, because I've been taking them for a long time now, but I do feel that I was more self-conscious of my physical presence when I was in groups. And I think that has a little bit improved at this point. I don't think I'm as insecure or even like consciously thinking about myself, if that makes sense. I just find that it's a little easier to direct my thoughts. And that's something that I do feel I can genuinely say was helped by the Kayleigh. Kayleigh, like I said, can also be good for one-sided headaches. So again, that's kind of the tension headache that I was experiencing. And then it's also really good for anybody who is experiencing melancholy. And that can be coming just from a general sense of like blah or depression, or, you know, I think along any end of the spectrum, it can be of use. But if you're experiencing a lot of melancholy or a lot of depression, Of course, you're going to have to see a medical doctor or a psychologist or a licensed therapist, somebody who can dive into that deeper with you. So I'm definitely not saying that these are, again, panaceas or that they will cure anything, but it is about really recognizing that something that may be missing from your physical chemistry is possibly, and when you start to supply the body with that, there's no reason to think that that wouldn't be a potential positive influence, right? So again, it's just keeping it really simple, trying it out. These are cheap remedies, and they're very gentle. So that's my 2 cents on that. Another thing before I get into the rest of the salts that I really want to address is that, I mean, even alchemists from the medieval period were aware of the healing power of some of these minerals. For example, the mineral compound Kayleigh, which is a Virgo salt, that actually is called arcanite, and that means secret. It means it's arcanum. It is the same word as arcanum. It's the same even by Paracelsus, who was a very, very famous medieval alchemist, wrote extensively about the benefits of arcanite, which is the Virgo mineral compound of potassium sulphate. This mineral has very profound secrets, I feel, and it's something that alchemists have written about. So it's one of those things where it almost makes you wonder, is this a physical representation of what we would call like a psychological alchemical process? And this is touching on such a powerful philosophical viewpoint that has really changed my life. And for the longest time, for the last 10 years, I've been very much aware of the phrase as above, so below, the alchemical phrase as above, so below. But I don't think that I really completely understood the real power of that phrase until I started understanding scale invariance, which is something that is talked about in complexity science. Essentially, scale invariance is something that really shows how the patterns that exist at one level of reality are mirrored at every other level, right? So a pattern, the way something looks, the way something is shaped on a microscopic level, the pattern recognition of scale invariance is showing that shows up in the same way at a macrocosmic level. So a riverbed flowing through the landscape, spidering out with all these different little offshoots of the river, that looks the same as the vessels, blood vessels in our body. Or, when we look at a microbial formation, if we zoom out and look at the earth and the way that we have civilized the earth, there's parallels in that as well. So at every level of perception, there is this thing called scale invariance. So the pattern is reflected at multiple levels, and that seems to indicate that there is a way of looking at life and reading the experience of life that can show you literally in very practical, literal, physical terms that something that exists maybe in the outer reality actually has very similar patterns and parameters on the inner level. And this is such a profound thing for me. This has completely blown the lid off of my existence. This idea that, because I used to think that our mind, our psyche, was this kind of free-floating thing, almost like spirit in a way. Like we just we can kind of shape our mind and we can mold our mind and we can, we have this part of ourselves that's very ephemeral, right? It's not confined in that sense, or even that the psyche could be, more flexible than the body. That was kind of like a something that I was laboring under, like an assumption that I was laboring under. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but I also think that what I'm starting to realize about, for example, our spiritual growth may not really be that different from our physical body's growth, or the movement of our cells, and the replication of our cells, and the details and the ins and outs of our DNA and our mitochondria, and how these things are all being impacted, and the complex processes that result. Is that another window into actually what it really is like to go through a spiritual process? This is something that I feel I can't maybe necessarily put into words as well as I would like to, but to the best of my ability, the idea is this, that maybe we struggle along our path of awakening because there are more parameters and more specific processes that are involved that we literally have to go through in order to expand and evolve. And that really is the idea of alchemy as well, because alchemy is the chemistry of life, but it's shown how two chemicals, if there's a reaction, there's going to be a specific kind of reaction. And maybe if we as individuals want to experience a new level of consciousness, maybe we have to go through certain explosions. Maybe we literally maybe we can't just circumvent growth or grow quicker than we want to, or grow along a specific path. Maybe there really is some kind of real inlaid pattern that we are going through on an internal level that matches what is going on the external level. So again, this is such a profound idea to me. I don't even know if I'm explaining it right. And it doesn't mean that there aren't differences between the inner experience and the outer experience, but I'm just realizing the profound, what I feel is mirroring going on between what we would maybe in a diametric sense call, the difference between the inner and the outer, are actually more alike than just saying that they are mirroring each other, or that one is reflected in the other. Maybe there are actual literal patterns and very complex processes that we could map out, and that would actually be extremely, extremely similar and function in extremely similar ways. So again, just an idea. I'm not saying that my mind is made up on this, but it is something that I find very profound, obviously. Okay, so we're going to get into the TAURUS salt, which is Natrum sulf. So I want to show you guys the bottle for each of these, and then I'll show you my little list here. So this is a really good salt for any liver issue. Natrum sulf is one of the Venus salts, and it's really good for kind of helping to move out impurities and also to regulate hydration in the body. There are a couple of other salts that work with this. One of them is the other Venus salt, which is Libra, which we'll get to. But this is really good as well for any throat issue, okay? So anything having to do with the throat, or the complex organs and hormonal systems that are based in the throat, such as thyroid. Again, I'm not saying this is a cure-all or panacea or anything, but this is just what it's talked about being good for. Also sore throat, anything having to do with tension and tightness in the muscles of the throat, not danger, but injury to the vocal cords or voice box. That's something that I actually have. My point in saying this is that a lot of people have injuries or old wounds. Even there could be an energy to that, right? There could be an energy to that. There could be swelling, in the lymphatic system, which also the Gemini salt is very good for, Kayleigh myrrh, which we'll get to. But this TAURUS salt is really good for any throat issue, anything about healing this area, or even healing, emotional wounds or trauma that is stored in this area. Really, really helpful for that. It's also good for, again, clarity of mind. And it's really good for also kind of removing excess dampness. So if you know anybody who seems to have a lot of internal dampness, that might be kind of a complex hormonal, or not hormonal, but humoral thing to get into with this video. But my partner, for example, has a lot of dampness internally. He's definitely more of like a hot and damp type of person internally, so he does really well with that one. So let's talk about Kayleigh, which is the Gemini salt, and I absolutely love this one. This is really good for creating more connective tissue. Kayleigh is freaking amazing for even issues that have to do with like anywhere that you need to build or that you want to build more connective tissue in the body. And that one can also really help with calc fluor. So we're going to get to that. It's the Cancer salt. But it's funny how you start to see patterns, like salts that are next to each other in the zodiac can sometimes really work together on things. So you see the Gemini salt works really well with the Taurus salt. And that has a lot to do with, you know, specific attributes that they share, but then also the Gemini and the Cancer salt work together on something totally different. So really fascinating stuff, but essentially the Kayleigh is really good for any time that you want to increase your general sense of vitality, anytime that you want to kind of brighten the body, bring up your energy. If you want to, like one of the things I do sometimes before I do a video or before I do a reading, I tell my clients this as well, is that dancing to a really happy, upbeat song is something that I really love to do. And I do that specifically before readings to kind of open up my intuitive mind. And the Gemini salt is almost kind of like a good collaborator with that. Like I'll pop a couple of these under my tongue and then just dance around the room to a really upbeat or a really soulful song. And I feel like that really helps kind of increase circulation. It gets my mood up. Gemini salt the Kayleigh is a very brightening energy. And again, you know, it is another of the potassium salts. It's potassium chloride. So there's going to be a sense with that. Anytime that you have a potassium salt is going to kind of help brighten things, bring up that energy, okay? So that's the Gemini salt, and it's really good also for fibrin creation, connective tissue, strengthening of the connective tissue of the body. And then when you combine that with calc fluor, which is the Cancer salt, that's really what creates the elasticity. So the connective tissue itself is, you know, with Kayleigh, but then the calc fluor, which is the Cancer salt, kind of creates the flexibility of that tissue, right? So it's kind of they really do work together. So let's talk about the Cancer salt. Calcium fluoride. This is a fascinating salt, and it's one of the ones that I have personally noticed the best experiences with. And it's funny because, and we go over this in the course, but I don't have a lot of reasons why this salt would work for me astrologically, but in terms of my symptoms and what it does for me as an individual, it really, really helps. And I also noticed that people in my family tend to do well with it. So I think there's also definitely something about genetics that can get passed down. So, but you also have to look at your symptoms. And the symptoms of calc fluor are stress. Interestingly, on the emotional level, stress about money and finances, even if those worries are sort of baseless. So let's say you've paid rent, you've gotten, you know, enough food for the next little while, and you've got the time to kind of put into other things, or, you know, things are just generally doing well. If you're still kind of worried about money or this pervasive fearfulness about not being able to pay your bills, that can definitely be related to calc fluor, which I always find so interesting. One of the other things obviously connected to this idea of tissue elasticity and collagen production, which is so relevant for calc fluor, is varicose veins, or any veins that are very visible in the body or that are stretched or that are kind of creating any sort of issues because they're too relaxed. So those are some of the constellation of things related to calcium fluoride. This is a really interesting salt because it actually, when it has heat applied to it, it glows. So there's something luminescent about the Cancer salt. And I want to also point out that in traditional astrology, the moon in a chart relates to the left eye of men and the right eye of women. And so there's definitely that connection with light and sight with this salt. But you also get this really interesting theme with, even in the work of traditional astrologers such as William Lilly, for example, talks about people who have a very strong moon signature in their chart having more visible veins on their face, or their skin is very pale or translucent almost, so you see more of the blood vessels and the veins in their body than, than maybe somebody who has more of a solar signature in their chart or a Saturn signature. So I just think it's really interesting that at every level, if you really study astrology, you start to see so many interesting correlations. So one of the other things that I found really fascinating was a study that was done on calcium fluoride, the Cancer salt, and it was done on the light emitting or the glowing effect that this salt has, and the study was actually done on July 1st, 1993. So really strong Cancer season energy there. They're studying the Cancer salt. I just think it's pretty fascinating. Okay, so let's move on to the Leo salt. So Leo is magphos, magnesium phosphate, or phosphate of magnesium. This is a really great salt for the heart, and one of the things that I find really fascinating about this is actually that this salt is magnetic. So when it has magnets around it, it's diamagnetic, so it turns to a right angle, like a square aspect to the poles of the magnet, which I think is another really interesting fact. And it kind of makes me think of the sun, right? And the orbit of the planets around the sun. I know it's not technically magnetism that's holding all the planets in orbit, but there is this energy of like the circular or like oblong circular motion of other planets around the sun that seems to almost imply that energy of like a right angle magnetism because it's always kind of turning around, but it's never going directly at it. So that's just another fascinating thing. Again, I haven't seen anybody talk about this. These are my own unique personal meditations on these salts, my own personal thoughts about them. This is something that has developed over time. I've worked really hard on this research, and I feel like it's something that is really, really spectacular. So anyway, magphos, really great for any kind of muscle cramps and spasms. My husband used to get like twitchings of the eye, and magnesium phosphate is amazing for that. So if you ever have like a random eye twitch that comes and goes, or if you get really bad cramps, or even just, muscular cramps, of course there's other things like such as maybe caffeine consumption, consuming things that are diuretics and therefore becoming more dehydrated can also be a factor. But if you are staying really hydrated and you have all those other factors under your control, it's very possible that you could be deficient in magphos. So that's another thing that you can use this salt for. It's also really good generally for any problem with eyesight. And it's really good for any time that you need to just relax. And that's something that I probably use it the most for, is just garden variety, let me chill out for a little bit, because I do have Mars in Gemini. So I tend to be very energetic, I think quickly, I speak quickly, and magphos really does kind of help me recenter, relax, bring my energy, into more of like a central place, and kind of helps keep me I feel more even keeled, throughout the day when I'm taking this. And again, I don't take these every single day. I do take, I'll share at the end what I do take every day, and then everything else in here fluctuates based on my astrology and my symptomology as well. But yeah, so Leo, it's good for nervous tension. It's good for hiccups, which is a contraction or like a muscular spasm, right? So when you have something acute like hiccups, or I think I was going to say this before too, when you have like an acute thing coming on that is very abrupt and it's like all of a sudden you've got hiccups, or all of a sudden you've got the one-sided headache that I mentioned with the Kayleigh phos, what you can do, instead of just taking 4 under your tongue in the morning and at night, like I'm pretty sure that's what the instructions say to do, you can take, what I do, not a doctor, what I do is I take 4 under my tongue every 15 or 20 minutes for 2 hours. And at that point, especially if it's a headache, I will maybe go lay down for 15 minutes. After that 2 hours of taking them every 15, 20 minutes is up, I'll go lay down, maybe close my eyes for 15, 20 minutes, get a little bit of like either completely nap, like I completely fall asleep for a short amount of time, or just close my eyes, meditate, breathe, completely relax myself. And that regimen really works for me. Again, I can't say for anybody else, and I'm not selling these salts. I'm not making any money off of this. I'm just sharing with you what works for me. And that's something that I've definitely noticed, is that if you get something acute coming on and you're like, oh crap, like I might be deficient in this, or I might be, I might not have taken enough of this salt recently, or I just went through some stress and my body used up that salt more quickly than usual, I'll just take it every 15 minutes, 4 under the tongue, nice and easy, and then go lay down for 15 minutes. And voila, the symptom is almost completely gone, or it's at least 80% gone. So for me, in my book, that's a really huge improvement, and I didn't have to do anything that I felt was too much strain on my body. For example, taking some kind of medication that would have side effects or whatever. This is a very gentle, very natural, it's an experiment. Just try it. It's an experiment. But that's what I do, and it generally works for me. That's been my process. Okay, so let's talk about arcanite, the Virgo salt. This is the most amazing thing. So it's called the double secret because it terminates as a double pyramid. Okay, this is one of the most beautiful salts. And in its mineral form, it's been known since at least the 14th century, could be even a little earlier than that. Many of these salts were actually known and used by different names, even in ancient Egypt, because of course, minerals were something that people worked with and something that people used. For example, the Scorpio salt is calc sulf, which is lime, and that's a plaster that's been used for so long. So let's talk about Kayleigh sulf. Kayleigh sulf is one of the most amazing salts. It can help with so many different things, especially anything that has to do with the color yellow. So yellow discharge, yellow coloring on the skin. It can help with, clearing, detoxifying the liver. It's also really good for oil creation in the body. So if you have dry skin, or if you have flakiness on the scalp, or anything that really makes you feel like you could just use a little bit of an improvement in your body's oil secretions in any way, this is a really amazing salt for that. It's also really good for earaches and ear mucus in the ears, which is not something I've ever dealt with personally, but my dog has had consistent ear problems since about 2014. She has, initially her ears had like a black secretion to it, and she was on a really expensive, organic, really good quality, grain-free, what I thought was a good quality food, but obviously there was something that was creating a toxic environment in her system for her to have black wax, in her ears. Obviously, and she was rubbing them, she was scratching them, it wasn't good. I give her the Kayleigh sulf, and I just give her 2. And I just put them, she eats them right out of my palm. And I do feel that it's helped. I do feel that it's helped purify her system. She is doing a lot better. She does have diabetes, so she's got a lot of complex health problems. She also gets bioplasma every day, which is the mixture of all the salts, which I'll get to in a moment, or at the end, I should say, of the zodiac. So she's somebody that I personally feel really benefits. She gets symptomatic relief from taking this salt. And I do think that it has helped because, like I said, she doesn't have the black secretions anymore. It may be because I changed her to a raw diet. That's a big part of it, I'm sure. But I also really think that the Kayleigh Sulph has made a huge difference. And she feels so much better now than she did before. So that's something to think about. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, I'm not a homeopathic practitioner, so don't take my advice. But what I do is I give my dog a couple of these just in her mouth. She loves them. She eats them right out of my palm. And I personally feel that it has helped. So that's what I'll say about that.